This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, welcome. Thank you all for joining today's webinar on the Part 2 CSCA exam hosted by APSCA. First off, I want to thank you all for joining today. We're very excited to be hosting these informational webinars. We did some last year, giving members an overview of the APSCA exam program. And for today's session, we'll be taking a closer look at the CSCA Part 2 exam and focusing specifically on elements to consider to help prep you for Part 2. For those of you who may not know, I'm Kelly Jo Potts, APSCA's Membership Services Manager, and with me on today's webinar, we have Rana Starr, APSCA's very own President and CEO, who'll be co-presenting with me today. As some of you saw, if you were on the waitlist, we had a lot of interest in today's webinar, which is great. We had over 200 registered attendees, and we hope that the information covered today really provides you with some helpful tools and tips to set you up for success ahead of sitting the Part 2 exam. And yes, we will be posting a copy of today's PowerPoint deck and a recording of the webinar in the coming days. And this will be posted to our APSCA website, along with past PowerPoints under our newsletter page. So next time you're on the website, be sure to check that out. But before we kick things off, I would like to cover just a few housekeeping topics. We remind our members and webinar attendees that APSCA meets and complies with GDPR. And more of this is available on our APSCA website if you take a look at our privacy and GDPR policies posted. Of course, any questions on this, you're always welcome to contact us at director@theapsca.org. As mentioned earlier, we will be sharing a copy of the PowerPoint deck and a recording along with a Q&A summary, both of which we'll be making available on the website in the coming days. Of course, we'll be updating our Q&A summary with any other questions that we get between now and then. And we've also gone ahead and muted all attendees to avoid any noise interference on today's webinar. So we really appreciate you being sensitive to that. And of course, we again invite you to submit any questions you have to director@theapsca.org. We did receive quite a few questions during the enrollment process itself, and we've gone ahead and incorporated these questions throughout the PowerPoint. So with that, we'll then move over to the overview on the topics we're going to be covering on today's webinar. So over the course of the hour, we'll be giving you an introduction to the CSCA exam itself, around elements around the exam development process, and then answering elements of the Part 2 exam specifically around answer selection, scoring, and results. Also tips on how to prepare for the exam, test taking skills you're going to need, things to consider, and then we'll be concluding the recording. And of course, we'll have the Q&A summary posted, so be sure to consult that when it's posted to the website. So now that housekeeping side of things has been completed, let's get down to the topic. We definitely have lots to cover. So an introduction to the CSCA exam itself. The exam is comprised of 3 parts and provides a formal assessment of auditor proficiency in the areas of functional knowledge and foundational skills as noted in our competency framework, which is available on the APSCA website. We of course recognize that the successful performance in the exam plays a really important part in your career as a social compliance auditor. So the information we're sharing during this webinar has really been designed to set you up for success as you sit for Part 2. With that, I will hand it over to Rana, who will now take us through the exam.
Great, thanks very much, Kelly Jo. The exam methodology was developed by a working group which looked at methods being used in programs that are testing and approving auditors. We discussed with them where areas of opportunity in the existing processes were and how APSCA could support the reduction and duplication of efforts when it came to validating auditor knowledge. Once the 3-part exam approach was agreed, the question, weight, and format was determined in consultation with social compliance experts, which included discussions with numerous audit firms. Now, having said that, there is no audit firm or individual auditor or organization that has seen the final questions and answers on any of the 3 exams. We ensure a level playing field across all of our members. So whilst firms and experts were part of the development, the final product has not been given, and we have worked very hard to ensure the integrity of the overall exam process. We have also worked to assure that specific questions do not reflect just one person's point of view or relevant to just one country or region. Exam questions are vetted through a multi-tiered review process, and validation is obtained by looking at expert organizations such as Department of Labor Guidance, health and safety experts, and others. All questions are based on well-established social compliance practices with a global lens and are not specific or unique to any one country or region, program, or brand. The exam has not been built with the view to certify an auditor to a specific country. Hence, during Part 2 exams, fictitious laws are provided for auditors to use as a foundation for their responding to questions. To cover some more specifics of the exam, in all three parts, the pass mark has been set at 75% or higher. If an auditor scores less than 75%, they are reassigned to the level of APSCA until they sit and successfully pass that specific exam. If they fail Part 2, they do not need to resit Part 1 in order to sit Part 2 again. Resits cannot occur in less than 30 days. However, the auditor also needs to be put forward by their audit firm before they can reschedule and sit the exam. The time between exams are intended to be used by the individual auditor working with the firm's training team and closing gaps that have been identified through the report process. Ensure you refresh your knowledge from the webinars. As Kelly Jo mentioned before, a webinar from Part 1 that we recorded last year is on our website, as well as this webinar for Part 2 and other documentation that we provide. The handout, which we will be sharing with you after the webinar, the Auditor Handbook, Competency Framework, use of APSCA number, glossary of terms, and other documents which are available on our website. We'll also talk about common errors a bit later in the presentation. So our Part 2 exam started with a couple of pilots in mid-2019 and have continued since that time. Between April 2019 and the 30th of May 2020, we have completed over 1,200 Part 2 exams with over 850 passing and therefore eligible to sit Part 3. We've had 3 auditors who had their exams disallowed for integrity purposes during Part 2. So as Kelly Jo mentioned earlier, we did get a number of questions through the enrollment process, and we'll be sharing those questions throughout. And our first question that we received was, I booked to sit the exam in Spanish. However, the questions and answers were written both English and Spanish. Why does APSCA do that? Well, during the pilots that we ran during 2017 and 2018, it was raised that sometimes social compliance words may be known to an auditor in English, regardless of the language that they speak. And the translation of that word isn't always as well understood, and it was asked to have both languages available. There's also a reverse positive for APSCA, as we are able to ensure that at any time a question that is updated is also updated in all the different languages. Another question that we had is, do I have to write my responses in the same language that I booked to sit the exam? Actually, no, you don't. If you choose to sit the exam in Spanish, but prefer to write in Spanish, you are welcome to write your responses in English, sorry. Same as if you pick an English exam, but you prefer to write in Spanish, that is also acceptable. Kelly Jo, I'm just going to hand over to you for the next couple of slides.
Thank you, Rana. Appreciate that. So if there's one thing we really want to cover here and emphasize, it's really reading the auditor handbook. So that's your main takeaway from today's session, if anything. And really be sure that you're reading it from front to back, including the glossary of terms. It's important to note as well that there are questions in the exam that are straight from the handbook, including in particular one around the use of your APSCA number. You'll note that there are 2 questions in every Part 1 and Part 2 exam from this particular category. And if you've read the handbook, you should be able to get those points. So there's already some free points that we're giving to test takers who've actually read the handbook. There's also 1 question on every Part 2 and Part 3 exam that asks about your APSCA membership number. So whether you're a registered level or a certified or an associate auditor, it's going to ask you a question around your membership number. Again, only answer the question that's asked. Don't give us a story. Don't tell us everything that you've read in the handbook about how to use your member number. Really read the questions and answer the questions that are being asked. Our team will often see so many people miss this question because they're writing everything they know about the use of the APSCA number, which makes us wonder, do they actually know the answer? Again, the question is specific and the answer should be short, so only answer the questions being asked. It's also important you're aware of how to write your number, since it should be included on all your social compliance audit reports that you're doing for your member firm. So if you're not sure how to do that, ensure that you find out, and know that we've also made numerous enhancements, or be sure to ask questions related to that, because we can guarantee that that question around the use of your APSCA number will be on there. Well, we've also made numerous enhancements to the handbook itself since the initial rollout of the exam in 2018. In fact, we are now up to version 10 of the auditor handbook, so that already tells you the many iterations that we've gone through. But we've also enhanced things such as how to book the exams with ProctorU, knowing how to test your equipment. So make sure that you're regularly sourcing and reviewing the latest version of the handbook. And your firm does get a copy of the most up-to-date version, which is also translated into the 4 languages that the exam is available in. So you have access to that. So please contact your member firm to request the latest available version if you're working off an older version for some reason. Just as important is the exam preparation side of things. So with that is knowing how to prepare and use the ProctorU system. So we always ask, that you follow the instructions and ensure that you're testing your equipment early to identify any issues that may occur. Example, enhancements made to your software, any new firewalls, an automatic update that you didn't know occurred to your computer, because not doing this properly can really make it not possible for you to proceed with the exam, at which time your exam would be canceled. So again, make sure you're reading the auditor handbook and testing your equipment. These are all detailed and outlined in the handbook itself. So it's really key that you're aware of this. And know that this takes time from your calendar, and it costs money to retake the exam should you be unable to test due to technical difficulties. So be reminded, these exams are charged for. You'll also want to ensure you're testing your equipment and connection in the same location you'll be testing in. We cover this in the auditor handbook in depth, but again, as a gentle reminder, this is something that we see sometimes where folks are testing in one place, their equipment, and then taking the exam in another. And for one reason or another, they have a technical encounter and they are no longer able to proceed with the exam. Also, to avoid charges for Part 2 exams, you must cancel and reschedule a minimum of 24 hours prior to the scheduled time in order to avoid being charged for either a no-show or a late cancellation. You can reschedule directly through your ProctorU account, so you have ability to do that. But regardless, please make sure that if you need to cancel or reschedule, that you're doing so with sufficient time to avoid any charges. We also see that some organizations will assist their auditors by having an IT person available to support with the actual setup and testing of the equipment. Sometimes they're there helping them with the preliminary side of things where they're testing the equipment, and other times they're in the room really following through the setup process before they sit for the exam, just to make sure they don't encounter any issues. So if that's helpful for you and if that's something your organization offers, we would encourage you to take advantage of that. Couple of kind of high-level do's and don'ts are outlined here for you. So again, you will want to follow the guidance within the auditor handbook to test your equipment. Again, it's very detailed and outlined in the handbook, so that is always your first to go resource when you're looking on how to schedule and test your equipment ahead of exams. You won't want to just do nothing and hope it'll be okay because it worked last time. So whether you've sat Part 1 or you sat Part 2 previously before and you're resitting again and you tested your equipment at that stage, you want to continually and consistently test your equipment before each exam. And you'll want to do that weeks, days, and hours in advance of your exam, just to ensure that everything's working as it should be. do use the Need Help Chat Now button. So if you encounter an issue, you want to use that feature with the ProctorU site immediately if you're having any issues connecting to the proctor or ahead of your exam at a designated time. What you don't want to do is email APSCA asking for our help when you're trying to log in the day of your exam. Unfortunately, there is nothing we can do here at APSCA in regards to the ProctorU exam process. So if you're having any issues on the ProctorU or exam side of things, you will have to contact ProctorU directly. And we really advise that you use that Need Help Chat Now function, and that typically pops up at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't utilize the chat function and email APSCA, and then we're not able to monitor emails coming in 24/7, so we're unfortunately not able to assist you. So if you have any issues, either as you're attempting to test your equipment or the day of the exam, you have to contact ProctorU. But again, be sure that you follow all the guidance within the handbook in advance. And we give you information on what to put into the Need Help Chat feature. So if you need to bypass one of the bots in the system, we give you tips on how to do that. But let them know that you need to finalize your equipment check, whether that's on the technical side or that you're meant to be sitting an exam, and ensure that you're putting your institution as APSCA and not your audit firm. We've gotten so many folks that are not able to go through because they're listing their institution as their firm and not APSCA. And again, this is noted in the auditor handbook. So taking a deeper dive into the actual testing equipment and connecting to a live technician, we're really focusing a lot of that in this presentation because this seems to be an area that will trip up a lot of testers, and unfortunately it will impede them from being able to take the exam. So again, we really strongly suggest that you do not rely on testing your equipment for the first time on the day of your exam. We continue to advise, we've mentioned it in the audit handbook, but you should be testing again weeks, days, and hours in advance of your exam. And we do have a way, at least ProctorU does, to see when you actually tested your equipment. And this really provides us with information. So we can also confirm whether you followed the requirements as instructed in the auditor handbook, and if so, when did you test and how many times did you test and what were the results of your test. So do keep that in mind. We do have the ability to check if an auditor has actually tested their equipment as they report they have. So the first step is really conducting a check of your equipment via your ProctorU account. So you can now go through your account online and test your equipment directly there. This may have been similar to how you did it for part 1, but again, now they've done some updates and you can do the testing of the equipment directly through your account. In the picture that I have here on the slide, you can see that there are a couple of red marks or red X's, and this would indicate to the user that the equipment failed in some capacity. So you'll want to be looking for these elements. And of course, if you get a failed category, you'll want to kind of look into that and find out what the issue is and address it before sitting the exam. Again, if you've tested everything prior, you should have all marks be green checks. But even if you get all green ticks when testing your equipment, you'll definitely want to follow up with step 2, which is really connecting with a live technician. So this is another important element. There's 2 steps here essentially. You're conducting a pre-check of your media equipment, and you're also having to connect to a live technician. This is critical. So after testing your equipment via the first step, you must also connect to a live ProctorU technician to complete your equipment and connection test. You'll want to fill out the little web form that pops up, and you'll click the equipment check function. And there they're going to ask you for some standard information. So they're going to ask you for your name, your institution, and the date that you're scheduled to sit for your exam. Again, if you get the question around your institution, you should be putting APSCA and not your audit firm name. And your name should be listed in the way that you enrolled and set up your account on ProctorU. Again, if you have any issues with this, please use the chat now function to get assistance on that. Once you connect to a live technician, but before you sit the exam, they will review and prepare your computer before proceeding. So they're just checking to make sure that your system is set up so that you're able to actually go through the testing process. Expect the live technician to request permission to take over your computer. So they're going to be opening and closing browsers. They're going to download any plugins required. They're going to adjust any settings that are needed in order to really set you up technically for the exam. And this is required to prepare not only you, but your computer and laptop in advance of each exam. Note, you will be able to communicate with the live technician through the chat function. So if you're needing help, they'll also be able to see and hear you. So if you experience any issues, either while you're testing the equipment or during the actual exam itself, you can use the chat function at any time to really get assistance from the help desk technician. Again, testing your equipment thoroughly and correctly will really ensure you have an appropriate and stable internet connection needed for the day of the exam. And testing of equipment should really be done in the same place where you plan to take your exam and at approximately the same time of day, just to really kind of help you gauge any internet traffic patterns or connectivity issues that you might be experiencing. And we'd like to remind you again that the section entitled Enrollment Process CSCA Exam of the Auditor Handbook really outlines detailed instructions about what to do and how to test your equipment. So there's more information in the handbook, as is the case with a lot of these aspects of the exam. Another little helpful tip is in the frequently asked questions of the Auditor Handbook, we have a little note around how to connect to your live technician. And we do give you some little tips on how to bypass the proctor you bought or the robot to get a live person. And you can do this by typing in the word, quote, transfer in the chat box, and that'll help connect you to a live technician so that they know that you're either ready to test your equipment for a scheduled exam or you're about to begin a scheduled exam. So again, these are helpful tips that we really do include and provide in the Auditor Handbook to help all our auditors ahead of testing. Another important element for us is obviously the integrity of the exam itself. So there are a few areas that we have in place to really ensure the integrity of our exam process through ProctorU. I will remind auditors that the proctors are watching, so they're at least observing you sit the exam, and the exam itself is recorded, which is helpful in some cases because it also enables us to go back and verify answers that you wrote in a case of, let's say you had an issue saving the exam itself. So this is rare, but it does occur. But in those events, it's been really helpful because it can be the difference between you needing to sit the exam again or not. So we are able to record the exam process itself. It is the proctor's role to verify your identity. So ensure your computer is ready to participate in the exam and ensure that the integrity of the exam is held. So that's really their role. They're observing you and they're verifying your identity. Therefore, if you wish to take a screenshot for some reason, you cannot do this without asking the proctor if this is okay. And this includes taking a picture of the submission page. We actually advise against taking any screenshots, and if you are caught taking screenshots or photos of the proctor themselves, that is we will have to disallow the exam. So again, you really don't want to be taking these. It's never okay to do this, and if you do, your exam will be disallowed. So the exam is recorded, and if there's a question about your submission or and how the testing experience went, we can always go back to the recording and verify what you said and what you wrote. So please keep that in mind. We really ask you to be respectful of the proctors. They're there to help you and assist you, but other than being remote, you should be treating this exam process as you would were you in a room with the actual proctor. So again, their role is strictly to monitor and observe from a distance to ensure the exam integrity. The exam proctor, or the proctor's responsibility, does not necessarily include making sure that you also select the right language or that you select the right exam when you begin. At the end of the day, this is your responsibility. So really be careful when you're going through the exam and clicking and checking off things so that you're sure about what you're selecting. And if you've booked to sit part 2 and then let's say you accidentally select part 1 exam in the wrong language, that is your responsibility. But if you realize you've selected incorrectly for any reason, let the proctor know and they can assist you to get onto the correct exam and or the right language. So just please pay attention to your selections, and if you need help, let the proctor know and they'll try and assist you. What the proctor cannot do is answer questions regarding the exam itself. So if you do not understand a word or a question, do not ask the proctor, as they will not be able to provide you any information, and that is not their role. And with that, we'll go on to a question that was raised.
Great, thanks. So our next question was, why does APSCA use a third-party proctoring organization? Why don't we do exams as in person or have one of our firms watch us? Wouldn't that be easier? So whilst we're not actually going to go through this particular video right now, the video is available for you to watch after the webinar. It's actually posted up on our website as well. And within this presentation, there'll be a link to a video that we actually made for ProctorU. It goes for about 3 to 4 minutes in length and talks about why we selected ProctorU and why we use online proctoring. But there are multiple reasons, and I'll just give you a couple of highlights right now. One, it included the ability to scale the exam, ensure the integrity of the exam, which Kelly Jo just talked about, the availability of proctors, which is 24/7. We have auditors in 96 different countries, and this is actually very important that we can scale the exam across those different countries at times that are convenient for individual auditors. Cost effectiveness, amount of time out of the office. There's no need for auditors to travel to the exam venue. They can take the exam from either office or from home. Also, there's no need to sit all 3 exams at the same time. You can sit them one at a time so you can focus your preparation. And also in the case of an exam not passing a particular exam, that can be rescheduled at an earlier date instead of waiting for APSCA to come around and offer the exams in the same location again. So those are just a few of the reasons, but we encourage you to watch the video with regards to why we selected ProctorU in general. So let's move on now to information about the exam itself and about scoring. So as we're looking at the exam itself, the same as part 1, part 2, you have a maximum of 2 hours in which to complete the exam. The format of part 2 is based on a single case study exam with 42 questions that are presented to each auditor. Each multiple choice or true-false question within your exam is worth 1 point. Short answer questions are worth either 3 or 5 points each. The short answer questions will indicate the maximum number of points that can be received per question. And this is highlighted in your auditor handbook as well. Some advice, and while some of these things may seem obvious, these are certainly areas that we see auditors make errors during the exam. First of all, read each question very carefully. The same as we said when we were talking about how to use your APSCA membership number. Those questions, ensure that you are answering the question that is being asked and in the format being asked. For example, a question may ask you to write your response as if you were writing a finding, or it may ask you to note questions that you would ask management, or maybe the type of documents that you would review. But answer the question being asked, and you can only do that if you carefully read the question. Also, the exam may include questions that to you may seem similar. Therefore, be mindful that each question is asking for different things. And if you think that we've included the same question twice, my guess is that you haven't read the question carefully, because all questions have been well vetted and you will not receive the same question twice on your individual exam. If you write a great answer, but it doesn't answer the question that was actually being asked, you will not get points. In fact, you lose 1/4 of a point every time you answer a question incorrectly. So reading the question carefully is extremely important. Do not consider the question in terms of a specific law in maybe the country or practice of an individual program. Only use the information provided in the case study as well as in the appendix. Do not attempt to answer the question without reading the case study or the appendix. So here's just a couple of tips for short answer questions. If you're asked to list several answers, do not repeat yourself. Additional points are not given for stating the same answer multiple times, but in a slightly different way. If the maximum point value is 5, we're looking for 5 different answers. If the maximum point value is 3, at least 3 different answers are required. Should you provide more correct answers than required, you will receive no more than a maximum points possible. For example, if there's 3 answers required and you provide 5 and they all happen to be right, you will still receive no more than 3 points for that individual question. One of the common areas that we see people lose points is that they're not carefully reading the question. APSCA has about 100 questions in the pool with only 42 going on each exam. Therefore, you may see a grievance mechanism question. Somebody may have told you there's a grievance mechanism question. We see some great answers for grievance mechanism question, but they're not asking the question that was being asked in the format it's being answered, and therefore they actually do not receive any points. So we can't articulate this strong enough. Make sure you read the question. For multiple choice questions, as with part 2 or as with part 1, in the part 2 exam, we also have the select all that apply, and there might be 2 or 3 correct answers. As a reminder, if the question indicates there are 2 correct answers, then only pick 2. If you select more or less, you will lose a quarter point for every incorrect response that was selected or not. Ensure you follow directions carefully and only select the number of answers indicated. If a question does not state select all that apply with the number at the end, it means there is only one correct answer and only one answer should be selected. If you pick all 4, that question will be marked as incorrect and lose a quarter of a point. The instructions are noted in the auditor handbook as well as in the instructions that are provided to you as you're starting the exam. It doesn't take time away from the 2 hours that you have to sit the exam to read the instructions on the day, and we encourage you to refresh your memory from what you read in the handbook. So we're going to move on to a couple of more questions now. And one of the questions, how does APSCA score the short answer questions? So during our exam development, responses to all questions were also created. These possible answers are noted in our scoring guide and used by each of our reviewers. If there is a question regarding the response given by an auditor, maybe the reviewer is unsure what the auditor was trying to say, we will connect with one of our other reviewers to discuss, and reviewers can send the exam to 2 or even 3 reviewers for their comments. So we make sure that we are very thorough when we review the particular short answer questions. So another question received is there a word limit for responses? So no, there's not. Although we do actually say in some of the questions, in 50 words or less, describe X, or we might say write as if you were writing a finding. We're not going to count the word to make the number of words to make sure that you got, the close to the correct number. We're just trying to give you an indication. We are looking for short, succinct responses. You don't gain or lose points for the number of words that you use. We're actually looking for your responses to be within the intent of what the question was actually asking. So we're testing your skills in a variety of ways. So if we're saying write the response as if you're writing a finding, we're looking for your skill in actually being able to write a finding that can be well understood. We're also generally looking for brief responses. Unless we actually say to write as a finding or to write as a question, then dot points are also acceptable. So another question we received was, we heard that the case studies from an Asian country. We're not Asian. How do we manage this? As we said earlier, our case studies or any of the questions on our exams are not country or region specific. We've had people from around the world that have worked together to develop the case studies as well as the questions, and also to ensure that we are not country or region specific. APSCA enrollment and qualifications are not country specific, and therefore the elements that we include in the case study are areas that auditors should be aware of as if they're auditing from anywhere around the world. Certainly some countries have more experience in certain elements than other countries. However, all social compliance auditors should know all elements within the competency framework, which is a foundation to which the exam has been built. We are not testing within the exam areas not noted within the competency framework. If during your review of the competency framework, you come across areas that you are maybe not familiar with and you want to ensure that you work with your audit firm to gain familiarity around those areas and answer any questions that you might have. Throughout all three parts of the exam, all elements of the competency framework are covered. APSCA is program and law agnostic. We're not testing your knowledge of laws. We're not testing your ability to audit to a specific program, and that's why we will provide our own customer expectations and laws within all of the exams where it is relevant. Another question that we got is if there's conflicting requirements between program, laws, etc., what do we follow? During our exams, you're going to be looking at the most stringent of the details, whether it's the laws of the customer expectations, and that's the one that you're going to cover. If you're auditing for a specific program, you need to talk to the program how they want to handle that. So we had a number of questions when it came to languages. So we're going to try and answer all those here in this one slide. So right now our exam is available in 4 languages. Those 4 languages make up approximately 80% of our member auditors' languages based on information provided within the auditor's profile on APSCA's data system. So if you are not strong in one of those 4 languages, please ensure that your profile within APSCA reflects this. If you are not noted as advanced in one of the languages that our exam is offered in, then we encourage you to not sit the exam until it is offered in a language that you are advanced in. We're also looking to extend languages offered during 2021 to include an additional 5 languages. These languages will be based on our next top 5 languages after the current 4 that we're already offering, based again on the profile within APSCA's data system. One thing that we notice occasionally is that auditors have not included their mother tongue on their profile. Please ensure that you go back and have a look at your profile and make sure that your mother tongue is noted as your advanced language so that we can take that into consideration when we're looking at our top languages. As a follow-on to that question, some are asking, since English is not our main language, do we have spell check within the exam? How can we use it to avoid misunderstanding? We do not have spell check or the ability to right-click to check spelling or gain synonyms during the exam. This is not an English or a spelling check. So we understand that when English is not auditor's native language, that we look around spelling mistakes or grammatical errors. Having said that, if your English is not strong enough to write a comprehensive sentence that we can review and understand, we encourage you to review your profile on APSCA and do not sit the exam. As mentioned before, if you do not pass an exam, you will be moved to the level of APSCA. This doesn't matter if you're sitting part 1, part 2, or part 3. If you fail the exam, you are moved to APSCA. So if you are not advanced in English, Spanish, or Chinese, there is no deadline at the moment for you to sit the exam right now. If you set part 1 and you struggled due to language, the amount of time that you had available to you to sit the exam, don't sit part 2. If you struggled with part 1, part 2 is even more hard, so make sure you go back and update your profile. Part 2 is a very different exam. The case study and the questions are more challenging as it requires comprehension, which we are seeing as a gap on many auditors when it comes to language skills. So if you are not advanced, update your APSCA profile, don't sit the exam. But update the profile before you sit the exam, because if you sit the exam and you fail and then update your profile, you will not be moved back to the RA until you sit and pass the exam. We've said this from the very beginning, but it seems to be something that people do not fully understand. If your firm is saying that you must sit the exam, and if you don't think your English is strong enough, then please let us know. We can have a conversation with your audit firm. No one wins because you moved to the associate level simply because your English was not strong enough. So we can't articulate it enough. Make sure your profile is updated. Have it updated. Don't sit an exam that you're not strong in the language. Kelly Jo?
Thank you, Rana. Okay, so the next slide we're going to cover here is some helpful tips and common errors that we've seen. So a few most common, and these are obviously very easily corrected errors, include not really using the time available to complete the exam. So you have 2 hours, so really use it wisely. There are no extra points for finishing early. And for us, it's disappointing to see when people fail and get moved to APSCA when we check that how much time was actually spent on the exam itself, and we note that they only spent an hour. So there's a lot to cover in an hour to read the case study and thoroughly answer 40 questions, which is obviously not enough time to do this properly. It's rare that we actually see people spend this amount of time in the exam and come away with an actual pass. So really make sure that you're using those 2 hours to read through the case study, carefully answer the questions, and then review it if you have time. We mentioned this earlier, but again, not reading the questions carefully seems to be an error that can easily be corrected, but we still see people doing. An example of this is really not catching the reference to quote unquote not. So when a question says not this, or missing that there are only 2 or 3 right answers, or missing that the question is asking for documents or describe a finding. So really being clear on what is the question asking is going to be key for your success in the Part 2 exam. Also ensure that you don't just look at keywords. So examples are like grievance mechanism and deciding that you know what question is being asked based on those words. So we have many questions in the exam that might appear to be similar. However, they are very specific. So whether it's grievance process if compliant with a payroll, working hours, treatment. So you don't just pick 2 words out of a sentence and write an answer that answers that question. So you don't get points for writing an amazing answer if you don't actually get the answer that the question is asking for. Again, the majority of the questions in the case study are specific. However, there are a couple which may be asking a general question. So ensure that you're carefully reading the question. And if the question is specific to the case study, ensure your response is again specific to the case study. You may need to triangulate information. So there may be discrimination, forced labor, working hour issues in numerous paragraphs within the case study. But it's rare that we include everything in one paragraph. So you really need to read and triangulate information in the case study carefully. And this will also show us where your reading comprehension is. And that's going to be really important and can be impacted, of course, if your language skills aren't strong enough. So again, that brings us back to what Rana was saying earlier about really being comfortable with the exam and the language in which you're testing in. Again, ensure that you get with your training team to be clear on things like discrimination, disciplinary, forced labor, and inconsistent record indicators, and be sure about what those are. We see many people, if they get the question about, inconsistent records, they then go and list a string of working hour non-compliances, and there really is a difference there. So ensure you know what it is and how to identify these inconsistencies when asked on the exam.
We've also got some more specific issues which you can work with your training team on, and they're actually noted on this slide. We've covered many in previous slides, so we're not going to go through these again, but please use this information to have conversations with your training teams to ensure you're clear and to support your readiness for the exam. So looking at scoring and results. Each Part 2 exam is auto-scored by the computer for the multiple choice questions. And then the short answer questions are read by at least one person to ensure a fair review is given. As mentioned earlier, the score required to pass is 75% or higher. If a score of 74% or less is achieved, the auditor will be reassigned to the level of APSCA until the auditor sits and passes Part 1 exam. Auditors must obtain the approval from their member firm to sit any exam, even if you've had IT issues. Exams booked and experienced IT issues are still charged by ProctorU to APSCA and APSCA then passes that charge on to you. So you will need to have a new invoice raised, whether it is your individual auditor paying or your audit firm paying. You must ensure you follow the process. Please do not schedule the exam without having received permission from APSCA. Permission includes the audit firm submitting an exam request sheet, informing us who's paying, invoices being raised. Invoices also need to be paid at least 14 days prior to your exam being set, and failure to follow these rules may see results in your exam results being delayed or even your exam being cancelled. So results are generally issued within 14 business days from the date of the exam. Turnaround time does vary, and actually we've been highly impacted this year just by the volume of exams that have been set. We've already in the first 5 months of 2020 done more exams than we did in the entire year of 2019. So whilst we try to get results issued at least within 14 business days, there are occasions when it takes us a bit longer. And part of the reasons it takes us to be longer is because auditors have not followed the process. They've either scheduled and set exams out of turn. We haven't been notified. We then have to go back and do a whole variety of work. That doesn't just impact on your own results being issued, it can impact on your results of everybody else's exams being issued, because we do issue results in date order. Once we issue results, we now have the ability to upload those results to your individual auditor profile. It normally can take us a couple of business days after the results are issued in order to upload that to your profile. But just know that you can check your profile for your results in case for some reason your email didn't get received by you. It may have gone to your junk or your spam mail. You may have typed your email address incorrectly and therefore it failed to be sent to you. So that's just another way that you can check those results. If you still don't have them, you can email the exam@theapsca.org and they can look into why your results haven't been issued. Please note that ProctorU do not maintain any of your exam results. They don't know whether you passed or you failed your exam. If you look on the ProctorU site and you see the word that says the exam was fulfilled, that means nothing more than you turned up for your exam and you started to go through the process. It doesn't even mean whether you had IT issues. It simply means that you were there. So don't look to the ProctorU system to determine that you passed or not. So as I said before, you might need to check your junk or spam mail. Sometimes it does go there, but email the exam team if you believe that you haven't received your results and it's been more than 14 business days. And remember, different countries have different public holidays, so that might be a little bit more than your individual 14 business days. So moving on to another question, and we get this question quite a lot. Why does an auditor have to be moved to the level of APSCA when they fail an exam, especially part 2? We've already passed part 1. Why do we have to be moved? So we want both auditors and recipients of audits to understand the value of that registered level. And so whilst we're in the implementation of our CSCA exam, we want our stakeholders to have a level of confidence in those auditors that have the RA status. If an auditor fails an exam and there's no ramification to fail, factories, brands, retailers, and programs will not pay attention to that fail, but perceive that RA level as having value. It's also why we have deadlines for setting exams, so people understand that their auditors have validated their knowledge based on APSCA's exams. Those of you that have worked hard and passed your exams, we want you to be proud that you're an APSCA registered level auditor and on that pathway to obtaining your CSCA status, and not sharing that level with auditors who have not passed. Eventually, there will be no RA level status. This will be removed and auditors will be APSCA until they pass all 3 parts. But in the meantime, we have this level to articulate to stakeholders, level of experience that auditors have, and that they are working through the exam process in order to become certified. So we've all been heavily impacted this year by the outcome of COVID-19 and the challenges that have been faced for our auditing community. And recently, the APSCA Executive Board looked at the due dates and for all of our exams, and they decided to review those due dates, knowing that this year has been very challenging. So the dates that you'll see on the slide here are applicable to any auditor who successfully passed Part 1 at least 90 days prior to the Part 2 deadline. So if you're advanced in one of the Chinese languages, traditional or simplified, you need to sit Part 2 no later than the end of September 2020, meaning that you need to have successfully passed Part 1 by the end of June. If you're advanced in Spanish or English, you need to sit Part 2 no later than March 2021, and that means that you would have finished Part 1 no later than the end of December 2020. Now, if you pass Part 1 after one of those dates, you have 3 months from that date in order to sit your Part 2 exam. If you're not sure whether this applies to you, feel free to contact the director or exam on either one of their email addresses. Okay, so now let's move on, and Kelly Jo will take you through some of the preparations for.
Great. Thank you, Rana. Okay, so preparing for the exam. As we come to the final few slides, just a couple of reminders when it comes to actually preparing for the exam, some of which we've already just touched on. But while repetition is the key to learning, it's also key for us in sharing how this applies to your preparation for each APSCA exam. So all 3 of these points that you see here on the slide have been shared throughout this webinar, however, are just as vitally important and are areas that we see time and time again do cause auditors not to be successful in completing their exam. So it's important for you to take note of these. Please learn from those who've gone before you and do not make these same errors. And to be effective and successful in preparing for your exam, really ensure again that you're reading the current version of the Auditor Handbook, which at this time is version 10, including the glossary of terms, and reference the use of the APSCA member number that's also available and posted to the website. Make sure that you're reading those resources and materials provided to you carefully. Again, we really encourage you to take the exam only in the languages or the language that you are most advanced in. So your APSCA profile should accurately reflect your spoken and written language ability. And if the exam is not offered in that language that you consider yourself advanced in, then again, do not book your exam until it is available in a language that you are advanced in or you feel comfortable testing in. And if your account hasn't been updated, please be sure that you're making sure that you update that APSCA profile language information to reflect your language skills. And again, anything related to your APSCA auditor account that needs updating, we ask you to work with a data administrator if required to update any of those elements, including your language. So again, that's the data.administrator@theapsca.org address. So definitely update and make sure your account is kept current. And a critical component of preparing for each exam includes, again, testing your equipment and really connecting to that live technician. We can't say this enough. Really, the detailed guidance on how to do this, again, is outlined in the Auditor Handbook. So just ensure that you're reviewing and you're preparing accordingly by looking at the Auditor Handbook, language levels, and again, testing your equipment and ProctorU to connect with a live technician. And here we have a little fun did you know fact. So the language offerings for our exams are informed by languages noted across our auditor membership. So ensure that you're including your native language in your profile. So this is really important because this also informs a lot of our language information that we pull from based on our auditors in the system. And I know that a few of, Rana herself, she's looked at the other day was looking at a profile and an auditor had listed themselves as advanced in English, and that was the only language skill that was noted, but yet it's very clear that the auditor themselves is based out of Cambodia. So with over 4,000 auditors in the system, we don't have time to really look at every profile and ensure that you've listed your native tongue. So we really encourage you to be proactive and work with our data administrator to update those language and details, because that always helps inform us on the languages that we need to consider for the exams going forward. So again, your profile is your responsibility, so you want to make sure that you're managing it and updating it and keeping it updated as needed. And here we have preparing for the exam. So what you have here are the resources that are permitted for this exam. Again, these are also outlined and captured in the auditor handbook, but you'll see that you are allowed a basic calculator that is not a phone or a computer, that you're allowed a pen or pencil, and one blank piece of A4 or letter size paper. So just know that you are permitted these resources for this Part 2 exam, and that the case study itself will actually be prompted and visible on the screen. And we also offer a highlighting function and a place for you to type your notes on the screen while you're conducting the exam. So again, be sure to use those tools if you think they will be helpful for you in preparing for the exam. And here we have we'll be talking about now the test taking skills that are needed for the Part 2 exam, and Rana will walk us through these.
Right, thanks, Kelly Jo. So each CSCA exam format is different. We've mentioned before, for Part 2, it is essential to carefully read the instructions, the case study, the appendix, and ensure you read each of the questions and all response options before answering. The questions are generally quite specific to the case study, so reading the case study, or if this happens to be the second time you set the exam and decide you don't need to read the case study, please note we do have more than one case study, and if you happen to get the same case study, we encourage you to make sure you read it thoroughly again, because you didn't pass the first time, and probably the reason could be is that maybe you missed some elements of the case study. So I know sometimes it's hard and frustrating to read the same thing twice, but please ensure that you thoroughly read that case study, making notes as you go along. Time management is also very important. Be sure you manage your time throughout the exam. You've been allocated 2 hours and allow time to review your answers prior to submission. So understand the time limits, monitor your progress throughout the exam. The time remaining in the exam session will be indicated on the bottom right-hand corner of your computer screen. And remember that your exam time doesn't officially start until the case study and questions first appear. So reading the terms and conditions and instructions doesn't count towards your time allocated. So don't rush through these. Make sure that you read it thoroughly, you understand it thoroughly before you sign your name, and then click through to the next page, which will give you the actual case study and the questions. It's also important to not make assumptions about the circumstances of the question or about information that is not included in the case study or the appendix. Ensure to focus on the information provided. The questions are intended to be straightforward and they're not meant to be trick questions. Also, if you see in the question where it says, as per the case study and the appendix, make sure you are referring to both of those documents and not just picking one or the other. So just a bit of a tip, don't spend excessive time on a question that you don't readily have an answer. If you're uncertain about a question, make a note of it and return to that question a bit later. Make sure that you allow enough time to go back and do that. So as we're looking at a few things to consider, you finished Part 1, you're now preparing for Part 2. Make sure you read through both of the opportunities and the strengths that was noted in your Part 1 exam report. Make sure you read through the auditor handbook as well as the competency framework. We've also providing you with a handout, which is also talking about Part 2 exam prep. So make sure you read through that as well. Ensure before scheduling that you've obtained permission from your monitoring firm who worked with APSCA on the process. So if you're sitting Part 2 again, you set Part 2, you found you didn't pass, we understand that you might be disappointed. We certainly encourage you to ask yourself under these circumstances, what could you have done to better prepare for your next exam? As mentioned before, review exam results from your Part 1 and now your previous Part 2 exam opportunities and strengths that were noted. They were provided to you by email and they're also posted to your APSCA account, so you can download those at any time. Go back, read the auditor handbook, look at the webinars, read the competency framework, as well as a handout that we mentioned, and also any other documents that we have noted throughout this webinar. Focus your study areas on those areas of opportunity prior to your next attempt, and make sure that you work with your training team. If you happen to get the case study a second time, still thoroughly read that case study. I don't know how many times we hear people say that they didn't need to read it because it was the same one. You do. You really need to read it hard. I read it really well. Part 2 exam is much harder than Part 1. There's a lot of comprehension. There's a lot of information that you have to obtain. Part 2 is a case study, and the questions are based on that case study. Read the case study and the questions thoroughly before you start. Many answers to the questions are not contained within a single paragraph of the case study. You'll need to triangulate information. So make sure that you read the full case study, read all of the questions, and then go back through and make sure that you've triangulated the information and you've considered all elements. But take the time to set yourself up for success. Take the time to prepare and ensure you are ready to sit that exam. So as we're coming up towards the end of our presentation, so feel free, if you have come up with any additional questions, prepare those questions to email through to us at the director email box. But we're going to consolidate those questions, as Kelly Jo mentioned earlier, and we'll add it to our frequently asked questions and a summary of all the questions from all the different webinars that we've produced. But there's no substitute for being well rested. Try to ensure that you have obtained adequate rest prior to your exam so that you can perform at your best during your Part 2 attempt. APSCA advises that exams should be scheduled at a reasonable hour in a quiet environment. Please plan accordingly. Don't take exams late in the evening or even after a long day of auditing. Ensure you're in a quiet place. We understand this can be difficult under the current environment where entire families may be at home. If they're going out and you tell them you'll be done in 2 hours, ensure you let them know that you'll message them when you're complete, because you may have 2 hours to sit the exam, but it can take anywhere from 10 minutes. We've seen people as long as over an hour to get connected with ProctorU. Therefore, making sure that you inform people that you'll either put a note outside the door or you'll remove a note from the door at the point that you finished. You'll message them, whatever it is. If you're in the office, make sure you've got a note outside the door. If you can lock the door to stop people walking in. We see so many people get disrupted because they haven't taken those precautions. Anytime somebody walks into the room, anytime that you speak to somebody, this can get noted down as an integrity issue within your ProctorU account, and we want to make sure that that doesn't occur for you. The auditor handbook and other documentation, the auditor handbook you actually will get from your audit firm, but other documentation is available on the APSCA's website that can assist you in your preparation. So Kelly Jo, ready for the conclusion.
Thank you, Rana. So with that, as we wrap this up, again, one important thing we want to remind our auditors is really just don't be scared, be prepared. So APSCA really appreciates your hard work and dedication to really help enhance the professionalism, consistency, and the credibility of the social compliance auditing industry. And we hope that this information will really assist you in your goal of obtaining CSCA status. We, of course, welcome your feedback and wish you good luck on your exams. We think that with the right preparation, you'll definitely succeed. And so for feedback or comments on the exams itself, please feel free to send those again to the director address at director@theapsca.org. And as mentioned earlier, a recording of this webinar will be posted in the coming days to our website for you to access. We also have documents available on the website to support with your preparation. Again, we are offering this webinar in next month as well, a couple of times, so that'll be available as well. But we'll have a recording there posted, and we appreciate you joining us today. And of course, you can always stay updated by subscribing to our monthly newsletter, and you can visit our APSCA website. And any questions, you can send those to director@theapsca.org. And we encourage you to follow us on social media via Twitter and LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. We're always here to help, and good luck. We hope you found this helpful. Thank you, Rana.